You, you are live.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to share something that a lady challenged me with a few weeks ago about Jesus had to be God for him to overcome sin, all this stuff,
Right.
And I was
Okay.
telling her, no, that's kind of the opposite. He had to be a man.
Yeah.
And he had that perfect bloodline from Adam down to Mary and Joseph. Even on both sides, they were both of pure descent, and we know Joseph wasn't his father. But anyway, she said, what about Judah? He married a Canaanite woman. That was her challenge. Okay, so all of his sons had to be, from a Canaanite, so Jesus was a Canaanite, right? Now, if you study out that story, Judah found Tamar, and she was the link between that pure bloodline. And his son, the firstborn son, didn't have any offspring with his wife. He died first, so he lined her up with his second. He died. And so before Tamar even had any seed in her, that was that whole scandal where she was dressed up as the prostitute. Judah saw her on the road one day, and he impregnated his daughter-in-law. And it was his pure bloodline that went straight to Tamar, right? And so she's like, well, that's not even written in the Bible about her being an Israelite. It doesn't say what she is. And so I pulled the book of Jasher actually said this. I remembered back to one of Skiba's books, Archon Invasion, where he talks about it. He's the one that pointed it out. In Jasher, it says, and in those days, Judah went to the house of Shem and took Tamar, the daughter of Elam, the son of Shem, for a wife for his firstborn. So, yes, Tamar was a Shemite, which is a part of that pure bloodline. And so, I mean, that to me, that also proved why those extra biblical texts are pretty pertinent in our study, too. The book of Enoch, the book of Jasher, modern Christians want to say, well, if it's not in this all-inclusive 66 book canon, then we can't trust it. But so I thought that was neat, and it just further supported that, hey, Jesus had that pure DNA in him.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got my hands full with the number that are typically there just to respond and make a comment. My hands are full, more than full. They're overflowing. Life more than abundant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But just since we brought the topic up and we mentioned this before we started, it's a great emphasis on the truth that Christ is a man, that Jesus, the Christ, the Savior, the anointed, God's anointed, was a man with such a bloodline, and how much more emphasis and time and detail could be given to say, this is a man, this is a man, this is a man, and here's Jesus Christ, the man. And so important that Christ never fell to the temptations that we fall prey to, not being that perfect sacrifice God gave his son to be, and but yet dealt with all those same temptations because he was a man. Right. We know what that's like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think everybody who's not familiar with this, they'll always throw that just a man. You're saying that Jesus was just a man or an average man? It's like, oh, not at all. I was saying what set him apart was that he was a man who overcame sin. That's why he's special.
That's exactly right. When they say just a man, they're taken away from the point and the intention and the value of the truth and the love and the matter. They're just taking it away. So what people will either tend to do, they will exalt something above and beyond what it is, or they will debase something below what it is?
Yeah.
Can't it just be what it is for the value that God means for it to be? And in that, you and I have both seen that that is the perfect position. That's the perfect value. In order for us to relate and identify with who and what God says we are to be, to become, as Christ is.
Yeah.
In this life, as a process of maturing and growing up in the mind and heart of Christ, dealing with everything that Christ dealt with, but just never fell to the temptations.
Yeah. Here's what I like to ask. What's more impressive to you? A man overcoming sin, or God overcoming sin when he was never vulnerable to sin in the first place? God cannot be tempted.
Yeah.
To me, it's more impressive to think that a man could overcome sin.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly why he deserves the praise, the glory, the honor.
Right. I know. It just makes no sense. But then that's what religion does. They don't really have love for the truth. They have love for their denomination, their group. They're in love with the messengers. And the messengers are there and act as if they're there instead of Christ, to replace Christ.
Yeah.
Which is antichrist. Anti is instead of, to replace. That is what anti is. It's not like, oh, the really bad guy. It's the idea is more of someone that is attempting to stand in the place of. To represent as if they are Christ when they're not Christ. Right. That's antichrist.
Antichrist.
Another Jesus. We read that.
Yeah.
That's exactly consistent with the very meaning of, even now, while the apostles were still alive, there are many antichrists. And the things we learn and read, we can see wax and wane, worse and worse. How many more antichrists are there today?
Yeah.
Well, how many denominations are there? Let alone splinter groups off the many denominations. I've read 32,036, highest number 49,061 official, recognized, separate Christian denominations worldwide that have their own group, identify with their own name officially.
Yeah. And John says in his letter, they've come out from among us. They're a part of the church. They were, that could be another debate or conversation, but it's a good point that John identifies them from within their own ranks, and that they've come out from among their groups, their camps, their church.
Yeah. Well, it's the in type and shadow, before the Spirit of Christ was given, we read and understand the verse which says, "Come out of her, my people."
Yeah.
And that's what the Old Testament is about. It's written not for the people that wrote it. How many people really understand and get that and believe that and embrace that, and then got to remember it in order to apply it? That's in type and shadow. It was a carnal message for a carnal people. However, God in godly wisdom, something man could never do, which as we see it and understand it and see the application in type and shadow of the old that was all written, that in spiritual meaning is applicable to us today, to the church. And it's amazing to see it that way, but one has to remember that and believe it in order to read it that way, to see the spiritual application for us today. For it is written for our admonition and not to the people for at the time. Look what the apostles did. You know how the mantra of religious denominational education, their rule of understanding, which is like a mantra, is context. How do you understand about context, context, context? Instead of real estate, location, location, location. The religion say, you understand by context, context, context. That's the key to understand. Got to read it in the context. Look how the apostles understood the word of God. They would take a half a sentence, a phrase, And of course, there weren't any sentences with periods and capital letters and chapter headings and everything. So the point is better said. They would take a phrase out of the Old Testament, just here and there, which had nothing to do, was very applicable at the time and fit in the storyline or context of the time when it was said or written back in the Old Testament. And the apostles would grab a piece of it, even Christ in Isaiah, would grab a piece of it and say, oh, this is about Christ.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, they do it all the time. If you count, yeah, I've got a paper on that, Andy, if you'd ever like to see it, how the apostles understood the Bible, you know, in that way, completely separate than destroying that educational, denominational method of training business managers to go out there and gather more disciples into themselves, which really means gather more attention, gather more money, build more buildings, you know.
Yeah.
It's context, context, context. Yeah, that's an easy, just keep it to context, 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 my students, and you won't be easily confused with any spiritual understanding. You know, we wouldn't want anything spiritual to muddy the waters of our dark context philosophy.
Right.
Well, have you seen that? That's what they teach. I mean, context is a really big deal. What do we read? How do we understand? Comparing spiritual with spiritual.
Yeah.
That's how we understand spirit. And every word is alive, living. How living is a piece of gold? How alive is that gold? Or is there a spiritual meaning behind it that brings life to us in the mind and heart of Christ, in which we are given the freedom from that carnal identity of a prideful, self-righteous, beast-like, competitive survival for survival of the fittest character, you know, that fights its way in the world, you know, walking by faith. What? Are you kidding me? You know, I walk by how much I can kill and slaughter and steal and destroy out there, you know, to make millions. That's more descriptive of the typical sociopathic, psychopathic person bent on accumulating as much of this world's riches as they can, playing games, playing a role, putting forth an image that'll work, that'll, you know, reach the heights of that which will rust.
Yeah.
Spiritual meaning? Oh, that'd be too complicated to teach. In fact, whose spiritual meaning will we go by? You know, how confusing would that make things? You know, if they ever believe that first, compare spiritual with spiritual. Compare spiritual meaning of this word with the spiritual meaning of that word by doing a word study, for example. See how God uses the word. What does God really mean when God uses the word 3 or the number 7? You know, you do that and you start to see a pattern of meaning. Because why? Study to show yourself not just approved unto God for God's sake. Study to show thyself approved as a follower of God's truth unto oneself. You know, to build our faith, that builds our belief.
Yeah.
Go study the number 3 or 7. Got papers on that too, Andy. You know, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 144.
All the biblical numbers.
Yeah, all typically the ones that are used more commonly, which would be every number up until 12, all inclusive, and then like 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 144, 10,000. Each one of those numbers, a word study on each one, whole paper. You know, a lot of work.
How long did that take?
Oh, well, having studied every animal, okay, sheep, lion, goat, every metal, gold, silver, iron, bronze, which is brass, every number, more significant number, not 73, right? Animal, metals, colors in every color, blue, green, red, yellow, 3 years. And then we started on the book that unveils the revelation of Jesus, the Christ. 3 years on that alone, kind of phrase by phrase, little section by little section. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. Well, should we end this here, Andy? And I think we covered that topic nicely.
Yeah. It's always fun to go back to Christ, his identity. Those could be a lot of videos in the future, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and it's so base and essential. Without understanding that Christ is a man who was tempted in all things, who then never became blemished during his life and learned by what he suffered, because we identify with that suffering, because you will be persecuted, you will be hated, you will be scattered, you will be a peculiar people, not many wealthy, not many popular, not many worldly wise, not many this. All of these things define the person, or speaks to the person that God chooses to take on this lifelong, narrowing path of refinement through God's loving judgment. Because we know, we read, do we believe, and embrace judgment. God's loving judgment is on the house of God now.
Yeah.
Not everybody else. What Christ say, I don't pray for the church world. I don't pray for the world. The most relevant part is the church world. Those in the church world and those with whom God's called out of there to work with them particularly, which qualifies and proves and shows and demonstrates who they are by looking back on the church world from which we came out of, and all the error it's full of, and all the motivations and drives that the church world seeks other than the mind and heart of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just ignore anything. We're certainly not going to address every verse in the Bible. We like this set of verses at our denomination. We don't touch that one too much. Stuff like this. And you come out of that, you look back on it, which gives vision to it and understanding. Mm-hmm. As John looked back, in the book that unveils Jesus Christ, he was looking back. We look back and we see things a lot better. What is that cliche? About Monday.
Hindsight? Something about hindsight, or?
Yeah, hindsight. That's right. There's a few cliches.
Yeah.
That use the idea, like Monday baseball player, like over the weekend they played a game, and on Monday you can be wise with all the corrective comments. Well, anyway, looking back on the church system starts to show it for what it is. It gives us perspective.
Yeah.
And without that, where would we be relative to not having had that experience? I mean, come out of her, my people. Would that even apply? And how special can you feel, and how do you experience a maturing, lifelong process inside an organization that never changes? Its sets of beliefs and its books and all its documents are the same, decade after decade after decade.
There's no room to grow.
No, they can't handle it. They'd have to change the curriculum in the school. How much would that cost? And then you'd have some of their antichrist ministers teaching something different than the other ones, because the ones that we just let out this year that just graduated have more maturity, because our organization matured and grew up and understood more. And they would be teaching something different than the other ones across the street or in another city. It would just be a mess. They have to develop their own tradition in order to function successfully in a world of competition where you're strong, together in a business.
Yeah.
You have a business plan. What's your business plan? Oh, well, we have a set of traditions of men that we've established at our organization, and this is how we operate. All right, for the second time, Andy, is that enough for this one? Okay.
Yeah, we'll get off here. We'll do another one sometime. As of now, Sunday nights really are always the best night. So, or Mondays, but we'll figure that out next week.
Yeah, well, I'm always up for it. You know that. All right, Andy. Now, should it be me contacting you on Sunday just to wake you up?
Yeah, because I hear your email. There's an alert on my phone when I hear my Gmail.
Okay, we'll do. Okay, we'll end it here.
All right, later.
All right, later.